Hey Brian, how are you?
Hey Ray, how you doing?
Good. Can you hear me? Yeah, you
Yeah,
can, obviously. You
yeah,
well?
I'm well. I left the room for a second to say good morning to my wife because I woke up an hour early and I just was like,
Uh,
oh yeah.
I'm really
Anyway,
sorry.
oh no, it's not. It's totally not your fault. Well, it's nice meeting you.
Likewise. So you were the
Yeah,
drummer in Scare Straight.
I was.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Nardcore.
Nardcore. Yeah, yeah.
Oh
I grew
wow.
up. I, I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. I've been here for like 30 plus years. I moved here in 1986. But before that, I grew up in, I was born in California.
So
So,
you'll repute another band.
yeah, Scared Straight played with, our mentors back then were ill repute and they were really nice guys. And they took us on our first ever tour across the United States. And that was like our first taste of freedom. Like we were like these little namby-pamby kids from the suburbs of Los Angeles, and I was 19. I'm 56 years old
Same
now.
age as me.
Okay, well, and that was our first attempt to escape our families and parents, and um, that was really exciting uh, until we got to Pittsburgh, which was 2 weeks into the tour, and we played a really good show there. And that was also back when in 1985 there was that maximum rock and roll kind of stuff going on where you were connected with the entire world really. So like it didn't matter who you were, if you had instruments and you were can play in that kind of world, you'd always have people that wanted to see you. So we
Yes.
had so we had really good shows, even though we had records out on Mystic Records. I'm sure
Oh
you've
wow.
remember. I'm sure you remember Mystic Records.
They had a reputation of being like um like shady characters, right?
Yeah, they did. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know if they were really shady. I think they just kind of. I think most of the kids that were in bands that were offered, an opportunity to make a record for their label.
Yeah.
Uh, I think everybody kind of knew that they were not like, we weren't going to be having records out on, SST records. Well, actually, it'd be the same thing, really, because SST records
Yeah.
had a super great reputation after a while, whatever. But yeah, so we got to Pittsburgh, and then we parked in a really bad part of Pittsburgh, and some excitable locals broke into our rented station wagon and U-Haul and just jimmied the car and just drove off with everything. So,
Oh,
but
oh, jeez.
and then I ended up visiting. It was like my first taste of freedom. I was like 19 years old and I got to be away from my parents for the first time and go on this great adventure. So I didn't want to go back to Southern California. So I decided to stay on the East Coast. And I was friendly with the guys in Corrosion of Conformity, who were like my favorite band back then. And the late Reed Mullen, I got him on the phone. He's like, well, just stay where you are because we're going to go uh, drive up to New York City and see the Bad Brains, who were reforming for the first of many times. And then I just waited where I was and said goodbye to the rest of the people in uh, the whole Scared Straight Ill Repute tour thing and just hung out on the East Coast with COC for the rest of that summer. And then I took a bus all the way back home. And
Hmm.
that was why I decided I was going to move to the East Coast. But
Oh,
but before that, I grew up in um, Southern California and around 1983 started being able to go to shows and stuff and saw bands out there. So
yeah.
that yeah. So we were on Mystic Records, and I still hear about Scared Straight to this very day, which is really funny.
Mystic Records, they used no color. It was all black and white. Every cover was black and white.
That's right. And they yeah, I mean, they had a little studio where they did everything, and the guy that was the head of Mystic Records was this older
Doug.
English Doug Moody. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we just couldn't figure out why. At first it seemed like just kind of weird that why would this guy be interested in all this stuff, and but he was, and all these records came out, and they got a pretty bad reputation, but
Yeah.
but we still had a record out. People still came and saw us, so it was like, are you looking for a Scared Straight 7-inch?
Yes, I am. I don't have that.
Right.
You got a spare one?
I think I have two. I have an original one, and I have that I ended up drawing all over because I don't know why I did that, because I was dumb. And then somebody sent me one about 10 years ago. So I think I have two. Yeah. Yeah. So
I'll find it. I work in a record store. I'll find all records eventually.
I bet. You have a giant record collection, I presume?
I'm sorry?
You have a giant record collection, I presume?
I've got about 8,000 LPs.
Oh man, that's a lot.
You think so?
Yeah. I don't really have a huge record collection anymore. I did.
Yeah.
And
I'll just say this is my lounge room. Can you see
yeah, I can see.
my records?
Yeah. You got a few.
Then on the other side. Can you see those?
Yeah.
And then more there. And then
It's amazing.
I have a few more, but that's about, I have a few more here and there, but that's about 8,000 altogether. But I don't listen to them all. I mean, people come to my house and they say, you never listen to them. I go, well, I used to. I just don't listen. Well, I don't have time to listen to them all the time, but that's not the point. I'm just, I'll pick up a record for $1 and put it in there. And then after 40 years, that's what I've got,
Yeah.
But, there's a lot of good records in there, but there's like 7 copies of Rubber Soul by the Beatles because I liked that record so much. I just kept on buying them. If I saw them for $1 somewhere,
Right.
at a garage sale or something like that, I'd just pick it up for $1, So
Yeah.
that's I repeat a lot of my favorite records there.
Right.
Like lots of extra Ramones records, lots of extra Sex Pistols records, lots of extra, I think there are 8 copies of Revolver in there, for example, by the Beatles.
Right.
So, all different pressings. Just because I see them, I mean, you're my age, so you'd remember when people are throwing records out and buying CDs, and records will you could go into a record store and buy them for $1 each, right? Remember that back in the early 90s and stuff?
Sure. I was a late bloomer for when I moved out here, I already had a huge record collection, and I moved out here, all those years ago with like one bag of clothes, and I shipped all the records I had in a giant box filled with those little styrofoam. They look like styrofoam peanuts where you pack.
Oh yeah.
So I mailed out hundreds of records all in one giant box, and I had a huge record collection. And then I don't think I really tried necessarily. Like there was never any moment where I woke up and said I don't want records anymore. But I'm sure it must have been way after CDs came out, and then I realized, I kind of like the convenience of this better. And
Yeah.
I didn't really have any reason. I think the reason was like there was a point in my life where I was a single guy living with people and moving around all over the fucking place in the same town, because I would have like roommate situations, and sometimes maybe things wouldn't work out, or the landlord would raise the rent, whatever. So then I would have to move. It seemed like I moved once every other year for like 10 years. And then every time you move, it's a big,
Oh yeah.
big deal. So I'd have to pack up all the stuff. And then that was also around the time when, I guess we're talking going into the 90s, where then I would start to go to places and see that a lot of these records I had would be held up behind like whatever record store you would go to. You'd see like these records that would be really expensive, and maybe some of those records were not very good records.
Yeah.
And there were, and I guess by that what I mean is early 80s hardcore punk rock self-released albums and singles and 12 inches, and you'd see them up there, and they'd all be really expensive, and that just kind of bothered me.
Yeah.
I guess. Why are they asking that much money for the second DYS album, or I don't know, just whatever. And then there was just this point where I was just tired of having records, and I'm only speaking. I'm not anti-record or whatever, but I just kind of lost interest in having a bunch of records, I guess.
Yeah.
And then when I sold them, it was right before like things like eBay started to happen, when you suddenly see people, because records turned out to be this sort of boutique item that
Yeah, that's right.
like it was okay to spend $500 for a discharge 12-inch or whatever. And so I was kind of dumb. I sold them before I could really profit.
Yeah.
There wasn't really a market like that,
Yeah.
And, every once in a while, I do miss having those records, I guess. But it was so long ago. I don't know. So I still have, a fairly okay amount of albums, and singles. But those are things where either somebody would give them to me, or stuff I played on, or some combination of both, and then they're just in a closet with a bunch of stuff. So but every once in a while I do miss having a bunch of records. But pretty much literally anything I got rid of, I can hear off a computer.
That's exactly right. Yeah. For me, for me, I started going crazy buying records in the late 80s because they were so cheap, and it was a good way to discover bands that bands that I'd never heard of before. For example, Steely Dan. I wonder what they sound like. All my friends tell me to stay away from Steely Dan. I wonder what they sound like. Here's a Steely Dan record for $1. I'd buy that. And someone would say, "Yeah, stay away from."
This is actually pretty good. I like this Candy Wide record. This is a good record.
Yeah. So I discovered a lot of bands by paying, virtually $1 each. That, to me, that was a year of me only paying $1 for these records, and it let me discover a lot of bands that, for example, the Doors. I have all the Doors records, but I couldn't get myself around to paying full price for them, except for the first album. I bought the first album, and then when the record industry collapsed and CDs came through, I was able to go to department stores and buy all their back catalog for $1 each. So that's what I did. Yeah, so it was a really good way to discover music very quickly and cheaply, because back then there was no other way to listen to them unless you had somebody record it for you or lend you their record or something like that. So, $1 each wasn't much of an investment. So I was able to quickly get a big collection of all different sorts of music, not too much punk or heavy metal, but just everything else. And But then when I started buying records for $1 each, I have to admit a lot of these bands that I took a chance on, I didn't like. For example, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. I bought Deja Vu for $1 and I didn't really like it. But then other things like Neil Young's Harvest, I thought it was great. But again, $1. I mean,
Yeah, you can't go wrong.
yeah, but it made me. I think buying records like that at such cheap prices made me become more appreciative of music in general, and it helped me push myself away from things that I was really, because I was very heavily influenced and involved with punk music and heavy metal music, but it got me away from punk and heavy metal into other genres, and I found it rewarding.
Yeah, definitely. Because when I grew up, I was like a hard rock sort of based young person. Like Kiss was my gateway band. Like in 1970, that was the first rock band aside from the Beatles that I noticed. And then I look back and I think, oh, in 1976, Kiss was like sort of the gateway band. I don't know what it was like in Australia. I'm sure it was different, but out here, if you were a certain age and Kiss came around, the way they were marketed, was kind of genius. And even the fact that you could even know all four of their names instantly, like the Beatles, like, Ringo, George, John, Paul, and then Kiss, Paul, Gene, Ace. It was good that somebody was named Ace, Peter. They were like sort of like my generation's version of the Beatles. I've always said that. And most people, even people that hate Kiss, if they were there, they can, that kind of makes sense. So that was like, they were like my gateway band. And then all the stuff I loved as a kid, by the end of the 70s, almost all of them started to suck. There was, Kiss, Aerosmith, Ted Nugent, whatever. A lot of those bands just ran out of steam. And then that's when punk rock, you'd hear about punk rock and stuff, and that seemed pretty exciting. But it wasn't, I didn't look at it like, well, punk rock is the new thing and that's going to destroy everything. I still liked all the stuff I liked. I didn't throw away all my hard rock records because of hearing the Ramones or whatever. But, a lot of people did. I just thought, well, this is just more music for me to like, Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect sense, because the first recording that I bought, my family didn't have a record player until 1977. But in 1975 and 1976, we bought cassettes. And in 1975, the first cassette I bought was a Beatles cassette. And in Australia, it's called Beatles Greatest. It was released only in Australia. Actually, it was released in the UK as well. It was just called The Beatles Greatest. And that had, She Loves You, I Saw Her Standing There, and that kind of stuff. Yeah. That was the first recording. And then I bought that cassette, and the week after I bought, I guess not week after, not long after, I bought ABBA. And ABBA would have been about 1976. And when we bought a record player, which was 1977, the first record I bought was Rock and Roll Over by Kiss.
That was the first album I bought by Kiss.
Yeah. Yeah. In Australia, it came out in 1977, a year after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
And then there was my journey as a listener of, because I was a hard rock and then got into punk rock, I missed out on, a bunch of other stuff. So by the time 1980, when I moved out here, 86, whatever, I was kind of, that version of punk rock and hardcore just didn't seem as exciting anymore. Like there were things coming out that I wasn't necessarily a fan of from that world, like things like that youth of today kind of stuff, and
Oh, okay.
I mean, those guys are nice people and stuff, but to me it just seemed like a cartoon version of the stuff I liked before.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, yeah. I didn't understand that stuff at all because we because we were Australian, we didn't have that kind of thing happening here in Australia. You know, the mid-80s, kids with the hoodies, with the X's on their hands. We didn't have that
Yeah.
in Australia. We didn't have that.
Well,
Maybe 2 kids. That's it.
yeah, it just seemed kind of, I'm not trying to knock it or whatever, but all I'm saying is when that was like the future back then, when that stuff became really popular amongst, a slightly younger audience, I guess, who maybe hadn't heard Minor Threat or the stuff that stuff was influenced by. It just seemed like not as interesting, newer versions of that. It just, and then by that time, I did what most people did back then. I just sort of went the other direction, I guess, or just, I just got immersed in. There was a lot of exciting stuff coming out that was really good, but it didn't really have anything to do with the punk rock or hardcore that I had liked previously. And also, like I just I started listening to all the stuff I kind of missed out on during that period, like everything from Gang of Four to Public Image Limited to The Scientist to The Birthday Party, and like I didn't really discover those bands until maybe 1986. So
Right.
like, so that was really exciting, because like all that music's really good. X-Ray Specs, maybe Radio Birdman, maybe Susie and the Bee, a lot of post-punk, for a lack of a better word, kind of stuff. And it's like, well, this music's as good.
Yeah.
This
I
music
love that music.
Oh yeah, this music's as good as any of that other stuff, but it's just I just wasn't exposed to that music because I was really into just reading Maximum Rock and Roll and
Yeah, I see.
so it all just sort of happened around the same time, and so that's kind of, I guess, part of my path, I suppose.
Right.
But
Yeah. So I like your artwork, by the way.
I like your artwork too.
I think the most impressive thing about your artwork is that you are able to draw real living people very accurately using very small amount of lines, and that's it's pretty hard to do. Getting somebody's likeness, in comic book form is one. I don't think people understand how hard that is. It is. Some people have the knack of being able to capture something about somebody. So I see what you do is you capture some real key essence in, like key points in somebody's face, and you are able to highlight it. And when I look at those key features like the eyes and the nose, I'm thinking that is really difficult to draw, but he's caught it. I don't know how. For me, it's really hard. I can do it with people that are obviously easy to draw, like John Lennon. I can draw John Lennon. I can draw some famous people that are obviously so unique that they speak for themselves. But the drawings that you do of people, that is a pretty that's a very special talent you have there. And then your artwork becomes potent because you also add a layer of another story, and then another layer of humor on top. So it has a few different layers. So it's hard to do. and that's why I think that's why your artwork is fantastic, because
Well,
you're
thank
able to slip in this extra layer. For example, when you did the Hard Ons, you made us look like us, but then the layer of bubble puppy, and then it creates its own layer of humor because of that. It's fantastic.
Well, thank you. Well, I got pretty lucky with Bubble Puppy only because, like, oh, you actually know who Bubble Puppy is, and that cover is just ridiculous looking when they're all dressed up in those jester outfits. Um, well, thank you. Well, see, part of that is, like when you have drawn for all your life, hopefully you do get better after a while. But if I have to be honest, the last 3 or 4 years, like my wife has a tablet, and there's
Right.
this, I don't know how you work or how you draw, but I haven't drawn on any actual paper since I got this tablet, and there's a program called Procreate. And with one of these and the tablet in that program, it's like it just opened up this whole other world. Suddenly things could look like maybe things out of comic books, or just inking and penciling and adding color to it. I was never able to do that before. And then I started taking just blurry photos and drawing over it. So it's kind of like cheating a little bit, but also I've done that stuff so much lately that I was getting kind of worried that I was losing my ability to mimic the way I did. So I started doing that again, and it's like,
Yes.
I can still do this, but I was kind of worried that I was kind of falling on that as a crutch or whatever. But and then I started doing it how I used to do it, and it's like, oh well, I can still copy something pretty. So it's kind of mixed up.
Yeah.
So it is kind of like cheating, but it's really not. It's like another tool, and I've done plenty of those things enough to know that even though you're going over something, it's still kind of blurry, and it's still not going to look just like what it is, And it's kind of weird how like 1 or 2 lines can. You might be trying to do something. I'm sure you know what this is like, and then you know that you missed it.
Yeah. Of course.
So you have to go back and then the other times it's weird how just one little line will make the difference, and suddenly with just one little line you captured everything. It's just really,
of course. Yeah, I don't consider it cheating at all. That would be just using another tool, and you're using guidelines and alignments, but you're still inking it. You are putting an interpretation of somebody's face. I mean, that's your skill. If I did that, it would look completely different. So it is for that reason. It's not cheating at all. It's your interpretation of those guidelines. For myself, I use the same technique, but if I need to draw somebody really accurately, so recently I did one of the blonde woman from ABBA, and I used to get her face accurately. What I did first was try and draw, looking at the image on the computer screen, and if I wasn't getting anywhere near the accuracy, I would just print that image out, and I would print it on a piece of paper, and I would put tracing paper on top and just ink her face. And so that would be my interpretation of her guidelines, from a piece of paper. So it's still my interpretation of it, but the guidelines are very handy, obviously. But we all do it. I mean, all my other friends in Australia that are way better artists than me, they all do the same thing. They said, well, we can sit here for 6 weeks and try and do this, and I'll get it, or I can do it now, in 2 hours. So I go, just use the guideline. It's easier.
Yeah. And it's kind of fun, actually. Like it turned out that, because I had drawn for years before I ever discovered that oh, well, ink brushes and using actual ink. I never did that. I used like micron pens. I don't know how to describe a micron pen or if it exists in Australia, but just a little tiny felt tip.
Yeah, I know those ones. Yes.
Okay. But like, because like in the 80s, when I was young and excitable and with a pen pal kind of guy, just cranking out artwork for anybody that wanted it. Yeah, I'll draw it for you. I would just rush through everything because I was so excited and I had really no discipline. So after my initial early punk rock fame of the 80s was over, and I was, when I didn't, when I wasn't super excited all the time, then I had to go back and learn how to actually draw.
Right.
And I had some wilderness years, a couple, and you're friends with Chris Sherry, I presume.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
We've known each other for 35 years almost.
Okay. Well, he was a fan of what I did, but he just called me up out of the blue, like I think it was the very early 90s.
Right.
And he just got a hold of my number and introduced himself and said, he had followed what I had done, and he was just wondering what happened to you, like, because you don't really do anything anymore. And that at that time I didn't, and it was the first time I had gotten any feedback from a nice person that knew who I was and remembered me and just wanted to know what had happened. And it was that phone call and becoming friends with Chris that kind of made me sit back and think, well, this is what I do, so I should just try to reapply myself. So that's when I made a conscious effort to get better and not see, what I did back then was so tied into the punk rock scene that when it was over, it never occurred to me that I could just draw something else or do something else with art.
Yes.
Because it was, because you might remember, or how many drawings of like a punk rock audience sing along with some guy and everybody's having a good time and all, punk rock scene, and we're all, walk together, rock together. And it never occurred to me to do anything else.
So that rock together, walk together, rock together, original 7 seconds album, 12-inch record cover.
Yeah.
Did you do the original?
Yes.
Okay, I've got that here. So that's your drawing. That's fantastic drawing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, you did it again later, right?
I've done it about 30 times. Actually, this is kind of funny. I'm signed up to do a 7 seconds comic book for a reissue of that record. That's supposed to be coming out soon. And I had a power meeting between Kevin, one of these other guys that's affiliated with it, this guy named Mike Gitter.
I know Mike.
Yeah. We used to be pen pals when he had his fanzine, and we don't even. He's part of the group of people that are taking care of that. So I've gotten a lot of work over the years because of that drawing. So I've had people that wanted me to redraw it with their band in it.
Yeah.
People that are like into Buddhism, wanting like can you draw me in that cover, but have a Buddhist theme of people meditating and so for whatever reason, I don't know what it is, but that drawing just has a lot of legs, I guess.
Do you know why?
I don't know why, but
well, I know why.
But yeah, I've redrawn that thing like 30 or 40 times.
Because you've captured something. You've captured a moment in time.
Well, yeah,
really accurately.
Well, thanks. It's kind of a, like obviously the other part about redoing it over and over is that as my skills got better, I got to, do like a better looking version of that idea, I mean, like,
yeah,
because like I said, I used to just crank out artwork for, if I was so excited to be a part of the punk rock underground, and you remember what it was like when you would learn how to soap stance so you could reuse them and all that
I remember
stuff.
that.
Yeah. It was really exciting. Like you were carving out this little universe for yourself through getting mail, and cassettes in the mail. And I had a double cassette deck, and I would like dub whatever I would have for my Scared Straight friends or whatever. And, it was really exciting.
Of course it was.
And even now when I get anything in the mail, there's still a little bit of that excitement of like, oh, I'm getting something, it doesn't happen as much now, of course, but so when you draw, do you draw in silence or do you listen to music when you do it?
No, this is where I draw, and that's my stereo right there. That's my stereo. I have that's a stereo. That's a speaker. That's a speaker there, and that's another speaker, and then there's this amplifier in the middle and a CD player just on top. Yeah, so I listen to music. Yeah, I just play a CD. I don't play any records while I'm playing. I don't want to have to get up and change the needle or anything like that, or change the side. But I just play CDs. Yeah.
Right.
What about yourself?
I always listen to music. I've always listened to music when I've drawn from day one. Like so back when I was a little kid in junior high school. Anytime I would draw, I would listen to music. When Walkmans and stuff came out, I was really excited because I was like, oh, I get to listen to cassettes and draw. So like to this very day, I always listen to music. Always when I draw.
So is this all you do for a living, drawing full time? Is that your living?
Well, yeah. I haven't had I haven't had an actual job and at least 10 years now. But before that, well during all that, I don't think I'm going to be doing it in the future, but I had spent 10 years selling merchandise for the Melvins.
Right.
So because of that opportunity that they gave me, it would be like working really hard for that short amount of time and going around the country with them, selling their stuff. And then Buzz let me sell my own stuff.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be this kind of nice little, I guess, cash cow.
Yeah.
And that allowed me to like spend the rest of the year just freelancing. And I was able to make it work. And I think I've retired now, and COVID happened. So for the last 2 years, it's been just taking every opportunity I can get. So and also I have a daughter, and I share her with the rest of her family. So she's here like half the time. So the time she's here, and then when she's not here, like I have like a 6-day stretch of not having her. That's when I work and hang out with my wife, and she's an artist too and does almost all the exact same things that I do, but she's kind of better at it actually. So that's What about you? What do you do?
Well, my first job I ever had was playing in the Hard Ons. I mean, when I was in high school, I was playing in the Hard Ons. So I went to university for 4 years, and in that time, I was making money from playing in the band. And when we graduated, my class graduated university. Everyone went and got their jobs. I graduated in Bachelor of Social Work. So everyone went into counseling, working for hospitals, working for drop-in centers, all sorts of stuff, counseling, community work, that kind of stuff. And it was quite obvious from my first year at university that the band was getting more popular quicker than we thought it would. So by the time I graduated, I went straight onto a tour. I was touring the whole time I was at university, and after graduating, we went overseas to Europe and to United States.
Mhm.
And so from the band broke up in 1993. At the end of 93, at the beginning of 1994, we broke up. And the
Right.
whole time I was making money from, I was making a really good living from playing with the Hard Ons, because back then, I mean, Australia wasn't a big country. It was size physically large, but only a handful of really large cities where rock and roll could happen.
Yeah.
But we play them over and over again. You could play these big cities like Sydney and Melbourne. You play all the suburbs 4 times a week, and that would give you a good living back then. And then when we broke up, I started working in record stores. I'd be bumming from one record store to another. I'd be moving from one record store to another. I'd for one reason or another, I'd stay for a couple of years and move. And then in 1999, the Hard Ons went to Europe and America after we reformed. We reformed, so we went back to Europe because there was a huge, really good offer to go to Europe. So we went there. And when I came back, I ended up working in a heavy metal store called Utopia, selling secondhand heavy metal records. And that was 1999 in October, and I've been there ever since. And I'm still there. But selling secondhand records is a fascinating job. I mean, I thought I'd be there for a couple of years as usual, but
Right.
I've stayed there all this time. It's an incredibly fascinating job because the world of heavy music, as I don't have to tell you this, is like no other. I mean, you could be selling boxes and boxes of Celine Dion and um, 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 who is Adele, or one of those mainstream artists. Is it Taylor
Right.
Swift? Is she Taylor Swift or someone like that? You could be selling boxes of those things, but in the end, you're just selling multiples of the same thing.
Yes.
Whereas working in a small, narrow shop like a heavy metal specialist, it's fascinating. I mean, even if I was only selling only I made in picture discs, that would be mind-bogglingly diverse,
Sure. Sure.
Um, so yeah, I just found it really fascinating, and it made me really appreciate. It really made me really appreciate people who liked hard and heavy music. The um, what most people would see as working class people. They would spend so much money on these records. I just um, fell in love with heavy music again. If you know what I mean. I mean, I always loved heavy music, but then working in a secondhand heavy record shop, it just made me really appreciate that kind of music all over again because
Sure.
of the devotion that people have
Oh yeah, they're
to this
very
kind of
loyal.
stuff.
Yeah, they're very loyal. Yeah, a lot of people don't. I've always liked that kind of stuff, and a lot of people don't realize that the early like maybe the new wave of British heavy metal kind of period and those records and that underground that
Yes.
that ran parallel with the punk rock, hardcore, maximum rock and roll flip side sort of underground. There was all that Bay Area thrash and like appreciating bands like Angel Witch and things like that. I mean, like those people are really dedicated to that. They're as dedicated to that music as anybody could be dedicated to Black Flag or whatever, and
That's exactly right.
they're really into it. And yeah, people don't realize that that world has almost all the exact same what's the word I'm looking for, path as any other kind of underground rock and roll, like Raven and Sarithangol and Trouble and Voivod and all that stuff.
There are a lot of parallels with heavy metal and punk have parallel universe paths, but you could clearly see where, yeah, it's you're looking at the same coin but from different sides, as the heads or tails, but you could clearly see where they differ, where the paths are different. For example, sure. If you pick up the record cover of I don't know if you picked up, do you know that record? There's a really good record by a Canadian band called Exciter.
I've never Exciter.
So if you looked at those record covers, Violence and Force, with the woman trying to hold, and then what is it, the third or fourth record, Long Live the Lao, where the guy's holding up a broadsword like that, and then there's a naked woman holding onto his leg in admiration. Now, a heavy metal fan would say that is just the greatest thing I'd ever seen. A punk would look at that and say that is trash. But then, so if you flip the coin, for example, if you got that record cover by Crass, maybe if you got Crass's
Penis Envy?
No, I'd say Stations of the Crass, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it's like kind of like nonsensical graffitied wall with just stenciled writing, all black and white. Yeah. Now, if you show that to a punk, he would think that is art. But then you show that to a metalhead, a guy into metal, and he'd be there going, well, where's the effort in that? And the amount of equipment drilling that metal guys do, about the visuals of all the stacks and everything like that. They're into larger than life, not subtle representation of their whole being. Whereas punks, they like a lot more understatement, as if to say, well, we don't need all that kind of stuff. All I need is my skill from my hands. And I'll give you an example. I saw there's a place in Sydney called Berlin Community Hall, and a thrash metal band played in there, Mortal Sin, and they're all really good friends of mine. A fantastic band, but they just sound like garbage in there because it's all bare walls. It's like they had to put the PA in there. It's bare walls, and it was so loud that that you couldn't distinguish anything. So it was just sound bouncing from one wall to another, because there was absolutely no carpet. It was all concrete. So it just sounded like rubbish. That they were let down by their whole thing, the big loud amplification, lots and lots of stacks of Marshalls and that kind of stuff. It just didn't work in that community hall. But not long after, I saw Fugazi in there, and they sounded incredible. I mean, like really fantastic. And then I went up to the front to see what they were doing, and the sound on stage wasn't very loud. So it was almost as if they said, let's just play soft so that the sound guy doesn't have to deal with one sound spilling into the other microphone. Let's contain that sound and let that sound come out softly, and then we'll give him that little bit of sound, and then he can capture it on that microphone and send it out to the front for the PA. That way we have clarity and separation of guitars with the bass and kick drum and snare drum. And I thought it was very clever. And that way they just blast the people with clean noise as opposed to this mess that Mortal Sin had. And then fast forward 30 years, I met Guy, the lead singer from Fugazi. And I was talking to him about it. I said, I saw you at the Berlin Community Hall. You remember the show? I said, you were the only band that sounded really great in there, because I think people didn't understand how to control that awful sound, but you did. You were very clever, and so you didn't play with your you were able to distance yourself from the task at hand and let physics take care of itself. You know,
Right.
whereas metalheads don't do that. Metalheads will just go play louder, play louder, play louder. You know,
Yeah,
and
yeah. Well, you just figured out, telling that story, you just figured out something that has eluded a lot of musicians that I've ever seen for the last 30 something years. You know, like we're like, because when you're younger, you're like, oh, the louder it is, the better it is. And then as time goes on, you kind of go, well, actually, a lot of the times the louder it is, the worse it is. You know, but there's
yeah,
the idea of power, and you know that metal has that, and some punk has that, where they just think, well, the louder it is, the better it is, and it's going to be more powerful. And I think a long time ago, when I was getting into other kinds of music, I got into the first couple of records by the band. You know,
okay, yeah,
the four guys from Ontario and the one guy from Arkansas, and they obviously played quiet music, and they were just saying, well, you know, all we did was we played as loud as we practiced as loud as it could be, so that everybody could hear each other, and so that we wouldn't drown out the drummer. You know, so everything was at equal volume, because you know, it was like, you know, kind of subtle music. So whenever we would go and play shows, it would all just go through the PA. And it's kind of like, oh wow, that's the secret, being able to hear each other equally. And that
yeah,
concept, that is, you know, with experience you learn that, but that was a concept that had eluded most of the people I've ever played with over the years, the majority of the time, because if you don't have any experience, you just think, well, the louder it is, the better. Like the
yeah,
very first time I played in Scared Straight, that was like my first time playing in public. We played in Santa Barbara. And I clearly remember this because I had no experience playing music. And like those guys, my drum set was way in the back. Actually, it was our singer, Scott Rudinsky, his drum set. I used his drum set. But I didn't know any better. So like their amps were like, you know, 3 feet, 4 feet in front of the drum set, and I'm behind it. Singers, you know, Scott's out there. There's a PA somewhere out there. So it'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'd just be like, what the, you know, like, what the fuck is this? And then, you know, if you play drums, if you can't hear anything, then you have to overcompensate and play, you know, I just didn't know, you know, I had no experience playing. And so really quickly I was like, well, there's something wrong here, you know, like this isn't, I'm not fulfilling my rock and roll dreams here. I can't hear anything. And then,
yeah,
you know, that kind of music's really, you know, you know, super fast, whatever. And then over the years, it just seemed like a lot of the times when I play with people, the idea of playing at the same volume just to practice so that you could hear each other just eluded almost every fucking buddy. And then like
yeah,
it literally took hearing these band records and reading that interview to go, oh, that's what people are missing. You know, even now when I see a lot of, well, I haven't really seen, I don't really go to a lot of shows these days, to be honest, even before COVID, you know.
me neither.
Yeah, but here's the thing that's funny. I still listen to music as much as I ever have, but I think, and probably for you, you know, because you've played music for so long, that maybe when you're not playing music and you get older, you're not as excited about running out all the time, and also having a family. You know, it just, like the listening of music is still as important to me as it ever has, but seeing music, it's almost gone down to zero.
Yeah, but when what happens, I think, is when you get older, you know that term fear of missing out. Do you guys use that in the States as well? The fear of missing out?
Oh, you mean like when you think if you're at home that you're going to miss something super exciting that's going on,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah,
that's right. Well, in Australia, we have this. Everyone uses this thing to describe that phenomenon, the fear of missing out. So, for example, um, people, people queue up for the brand new iPhone for like at 2 in the morning, so they can be the first one to get this iPhone, and they don't want to turn up on the day of release and be all sold out. They want it there and then, and this whole idea that you have this fear of missing out, so you have to be involved. You have to go to certain concerts, but I guess when you're younger, you are susceptible to it. But I'm I think the fear of missing out disappeared for me probably when I turned 30 or 40, around that time. So
right.
so for example, the Melvins, right? Now, you probably already know we're pretty good friends with Buzz and Dale.
Mhm.
We've known those guys for a long time, and I go to absolutely every tour that they every time they come to Australia, I would go and see them play and go and say hello. But for one reason or another, I didn't go to their last tour. I think I was doing something with my family, and a friend of mine said, "Did you see the Melvins the other night?" And I said, "No, I didn't go." And he said, "How can you not go? They're the best band in the world. They have been for the last 30, 40 years." And I go, "Well, yeah, they're an amazing band. They're one of the best bands I've ever seen live, and I love their records. But I've been to every fucking one of their concerts in Sydney since they've been coming here, and I've missed one." And I just said to him, "I no longer have a fear of missing out. I'm in my 50s. Leave me alone."
That's right. I think what's also funny is when you talk to people about that, they can't believe that, but you love music. It's like, well, yeah, I do love music, but it's the same thing, maybe now I have stuff that's more important to me, I mean, it does happen,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, and also I think for me at least along the way, I saw so much music, experienced so much music, and got a chance to see a lot of really good shit. And um, I'm still just as excited about discovering stuff now, but the amount of times that happens to me now compared to like say me in my 20s, it's not really a lot. And also I don't really have the time. Like I have to pick the time. uh my time is kind of limited, so I have a certain amount of time to devote to something, if I'm going to do it.
yes,
So
yeah,
going to the internet and fighting, going through 10,000 bands to find the five I'm going to like is just not. It's just not a big motivating factor. I think also there's this fear people have of getting older, where like now that I'm older, I can see that the fear is being obsolete, not being cool or with it. But I was never cool with it, even when I was a youngster. So this is just a continuation of all that, like
that's right.
it's no longer it's no longer a big driving force, like
No, no,
but I still love music as much as I ever have. Listen to it almost every day, whether it's home or in the car when I'm driving around or whatever. But I have to pick and choose, and so the fear that people have of being obsolete is really big, and maybe that goes along with the fear of missing out. Like like, oh, there's this thing I'm gonna not be a part of if I don't go out all the time to witness it. Like, I'm gonna be the first person to know about this stuff. And then when you get
Yeah.
older, like, there's people I know that are our age that a couple that I don't want to use the term hipster, but there's this fear they have of not being cool, whatever that means, a fear of being obsolete, and they're almost ashamed of their age. Like, people that desperately try to stay 30 years old forever and keep up with everything. That's very hipsterish.
We have that in Australia too. Yeah.
I've seen some of your anti-hipster cartoon stuff, and I totally agree with all that stuff. Like people can't just enjoy something because they enjoy it. There has to be some underlying reason behind it, and either you like something or you don't. Having said that, I do take a certain amount of pleasure, and if some of the stuff I like is deemed uncool by people, that just makes it all the better. Like, being cool is a very overrated quality that people have, and it really has nothing. It has nothing to do with the enjoyment that you can get from creative endeavors or enjoying music or art or whatever. I do like some stuff that's pretentious, but the whole self-importance thing that people have with that stuff, I never really understood. Because I was always just like a fan of the stuff, just because I liked it. I didn't care if anyone else liked it. It's the same thing with punk rock. When people got into punk rock, if they didn't have a background in rock music or liking music, and they're like, well, I never listened to AC/DC because people in my high school were mean to me. And it's like, well, that's your loss, because AC/DC is one of the fucking greatest rock bands that has ever existed. So you're totally missing out if you're going to let a bunch of idiots steer you away from enjoying AC/DC. And then here comes punk rock, and this is our stuff. And it's like, man, I'm sorry, but I'll take AC/DC over most punk rock stuff that people lord over any day, to this very day. I love AC/DC. You saw them
sorry?
a lot, right? You saw AC/DC a lot early on, right?
I only saw them once back in I've only seen AC/DC twice in my life. The first time was 1976, and the second time was 2009. Yeah, 2009. So a lot of time in between, obviously.
Yeah.
But I own the Ampeg bass speaker box that Mark Evans, the original bass player, used to have and play when he was in AC/DC. I have that. That's the speaker box that now belongs to the Hard Ons. It has been in the Hard Ons possession for the last 15 years.
That's awesome.
And then when we toured with Rose Tattoo a couple of years ago, he's now the bass player in Rose Tattoo.
Right.
And we were doing a show near where we all live, and I said, Mark, instead of hiring something, I'll bring my Ampeg speaker box, which you used to own. We'll use it. He said, yeah, bring it. And so I brought it, and I said, there you go. You're reunited. This is the AC/DC box. And yeah. And he said, see that carpet? I put that carpet on myself. I go, yeah, it's starting to fray. So I've had to fix some of your carpet work. But yeah, I've got that's the heart that belongs to the Hard Ons now, that speaker box. From 1970, he got it from Ampeg in 1975, I think, but it's a 73 model.
Right. That's awesome. Yeah.
I still have it.
That's great. That's awesome. But yeah, my original point in that was that I always thought it was weird when people that got into punk rock just, well, this is my music, and everything else that's happened before, it's old and it's not good, but this is now. And I also never agreed with that. I just used AC/DC as an example, but does that make sense? Like people that maybe don't really like music and just kind of like, well, this is the new thing, and I'm part of this, and I'm people that become full-fledged punk rockers in like 2 weeks time.
I think it's yeah. Look, I think the whole idea of artificially constructed music scenes is a whole bunch of bogus rubbish. That's my personal opinion, but I can understand that. You know, the whole well, it's not really bogus, but look, if you're going to stay in the punk scene and stay there and not look at anything else, then it's going to end up in disappointment. You know, it really is because
It was
live,
disappointing, but it was disappointing for me by 19 whatever, like 1980 whatever, like
yeah, because look, but I'm saying it from my point of view. I mean, I was an immigrant kid coming from Korea to Australia, and I
yeah,
was 9 when I came to Australia. So my family, because of our racial minority status, we were already alien anyway. So we were always the outsider. So from the get-go, you think that punk rock really does speak to you. But once you hang out with people calling themselves punk, it's exactly the same as anything else. It's a whole lot of tiered bullshit. You've got people in power and all the minions. It's exactly the same as anything else.
it's exactly the same. It's like a temporary. Yeah. It's like a temporary home for a little while, but after a while, you see the fallacies in it, and that it's just like anything else.
That's exactly right. Yeah. If it'll only be a temporary home for a really short time, and it'll burn out. And to be quite honest, it was meant to burn out anyway, wasn't it? I mean, to me, I always look at the Sex Pistols disappearing and turning into Public Image Limited. So I'm thinking, well, nothing lasts forever. So this was great. Sex Pistols was fantastic, sure. But it burnt itself to death. And from there, Public Image Limited came, which arguably is even better. So
I totally agree. Those first 3 records,
incredible.
At least the first 3 Public Image Limited records, all 3 of those for various reasons. The song theme, I love that. To this very day, that 10-minute dirge. Oh.
Yes, my favorite is Metal Box. It's still Metal Box. Yeah,
Albatross and
yes,
Swan and Top Tones.
Yeah, but the thing is, people. I think people are seduced and drawn to limitations and slavery. They seem to like it. So, I don't know why anyone would enslave themselves by being attached to something like a social group and stuff like that, So, but that's just my personal take on it. But I remember Jelly Biafra in some punk documentary who said, "Oh, with punk nowadays, you have people who, the people left in the punk scene now are people who really want to be there." And then he said, which is both good and bad. And I kind of agree with him, You'd really have to want to be a punk to be involved in a scene because, well, it's a pretty big wide world out there. There's a lot of fascinating stuff. Sure. I don't know. Yeah, some of the most wonderful people, lifelong friends I've met through the so-called punk scene from, just touring and meeting these people who were involved in the punk scene. So they were some of the most wonderful people. But far as I can see, they're no longer involved with punk, other than they still like the music a lot. and they're still my lifelong friends, you know. But I don't think they're right now. I don't think they're writing critiques of um, their own little scene for some fanzine for other people's perusal or anything. They don't do any of that kind of stuff. They don't write scene reports,
They don't have.
and you know what I mean. They don't do that kind of stuff.
Well,
Um,
it's a different universe now, and social the dawning of the social. We were alive before social media happened. I owe a lot to social media, um, with its faults. Even including its faults. And I never could have been able. I know I never could have been able to have spent 10 years not working a real job without social media. There's no way I could have done that. But that's how it is now. And back then, we lived through the pre-internet age, and now it's really funny because of social media and technology, I can talk to you right now, halfway around the world. Which is great.
35 years ago, you'll be applying soap onto stamps and sending it to me.
I used to write. I had pen pals, and I never wrote to you, but I wrote to some dude in the band Vicious Circle.
Was it Paul or Albie?
Albie.
Albie, yeah, it would have been Albie. Albie was a great pen pal gatherer. Yeah,
yeah.
He was the one that had the enthusiasm for it.
Right, and where I lived, I was the guy in the small group of friends I had. That was the guy that would write to. That was my job or whatever. But yeah, no, people now don't. It's just, what am I trying to say? We were alive and communicated with people through calling and writing letters and sending packages, and now people, although I'm sure they still do that, it's far more convenient to send an email and stuff, and it's just a different world. So it's kind of weird to go back and think of, well, we existed just fine without all this stuff, and it's just a different time, but
yeah.
But I'm not, I'm not a slave to it. I'd like to think that something really cool is going to happen next week, or I'm going to hear something next week, or I'm going to draw something next week, or, even me doing these interviews, it's the same spirit of just being creative and talking to like-minded people and being excited about hearing music or art, talking about art or whatever. That's exactly the same thing. And that really doesn't have anything to do with punk rock or the scene or whatever. It's just, I like to do this stuff and I'm going to keep doing it. So that's kind of it, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, of course it does. My issue with the punk scene has always been that it was so contradictory that it made no sense to me. So on one hand, it's meant to be a gathering of misfits who don't fit into mainstream society, forming their own bands, writing their own fanzines and that kind of stuff. Sure. But then you're not allowed to be anything other than a misfit. So you'll be judged and judged pretty harshly. There's this constant judgment on your behavior, your band. I remember reading things in fanzines like, this band's gone metal. It's like, what's the problem? Do you remember when Raw Power put out the Wop Hour EP?
I do.
Well, there's people, all these fanzines, they've gone metal. Our Italian friends have gone metal. It's like, I love this Wop Hour EP. I love metal. What's the issue here?
I always thought punk metal were like this.
Yeah. So there's all this. Yeah.
I never, it's rebel music.
I just, for a bunch of people who are meant to be misfits and rebels, they always let they'd always eat each other. They'd always turn on each other and judge each other. And I just found that, that's in the end, there were so many people who used to come up to my face and say, "You're not a real punk," and I'd look at them and go, "When did I say I was a real punk?" Well, you're in the Hard Ons. You're playing punk music. I go, "That's punk music? Who decided that?" It's like, "Well, it's punk music." Well, you're the arbiter of what's punk and what's not punk. So you're saying I play punk music, but I'm a phony because I'm not a punk. I go, so only punk people can play punk music, and it just really confused me. And I think in the end he was confused as well. And I did have a lot of experiences from people saying, I'd pick up a fanzine from Melbourne and they'd say, blah, 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 Hard Ons are a bunch of phony punks. And it's like, well, when did we ever say that we were punk? We love Deep Purple. Look at our hair. We've got long hair.
Yeah.
So I just found that I found that attitude elitist. It's like, this is us. This is our scene. You're not a part of it.
Excuse me. I got so excited my glasses flew off. That's called gatekeeping.
Yeah,
that's the term they would use now. Well, that was the same thing for me. It was like, I'll like whatever I like. I don't need, in fact, the more blowback I got for liking the wrong things or whatever, and that was only in regards to being in a scene or whatever, or the punk, how many letters do you remember reading in fanzines where they would try to define what the rules of punk rock? Well, punk rock means this, punk rock means that. I listened to that whole interview you did with Damian, and I was like, well, this guy has totally the right attitude. That's exactly what I think. It's like a state of mind. It's like punk rock to me can be, I'm going to listen to Pharoah Sanders. That's punk rock. I'm going to listen to whatever, some obscure hardcore punk rock 7-inch from the 80s. I like that with the same enjoyment as I would like Pharoah Sanders. To me, it's no different. It's punk. It's just an attitude. It's not a sound or a time or a scene. It's just, it could be whatever you want. Like a band like the Minutemen or the Big Boys. Big Boys shirt I'm wearing right here. It's like the Big Boys and the Minutemen were very life-affirming bands, and they would, punk rock apparently meant no rules. So, I saw the Minutemen a bunch. They were fucking great, and they gave people no rules. Okay, this is what you little kids with mohawks kept saying: anarchy, no rules. This is musical anarchy. It may not be fast hardcore. The Big Boys might have a bunch of arty post-punk songs or a funky song, whatever, and we're going to mix that up with this regular punk stuff. And if you don't like it, that's your problem, because if it's meant to be no rules, then this is what you get. But then, you just kind of, I got cynical pretty quickly. Whereas at first I was wide open. And then, like you said, when you have those encounters with people, it just sort of sours you on the idea of being part of anything. And people just love, to this very day, they practically beg to be categorized. They practically want to be labeled, whether it's in terms of what kind of a person they are, or when talking about politics or whatever. That stuff's very important. But people, like, you can't be your own person and have opinions. You got to be part of a team. People just want to be part of something. They can't really. They can't stand on their own as an individual, because the individual is the first person that always gets destroyed. Like the individual is the biggest enemy to anybody, really. When you think about it. And so like how many letters did you read over the years? Well, punk rock means this, and you're not punk, and us punks. Anytime anyone ever contacts me and says, well, us punks were like this, us punks, we're punks, and it's like, I never said I was punk. Just like what you said with the Hard Ons, I mean, I remember like buying Hard Ons records, and it was like, oh, this is cool. This is like a mix of like some, Ramones-y, Descendants-y, some metal, all in this big blender. Not easily defined, just kind of, you guys obviously liked a lot of music, Nobody was telling you what to do. So, but I'm sure you were told, well, you guys aren't punk. Or, how many millions of bands and people were told, well, you're not punk. So that's how you know you're doing something right. When you start getting blowback from idiots that want to gatekeep everything and want to beg to categorize themselves as something. Like, we have to be this. And if we're this, and if you're this, then you suck and we're great. And it's the same kind of useless crap that's always been there. Keep them guessing is what I always say.
Yeah. It's
that
hard
make
to
sense?
Of course it does. It's hard to the way I see everything. I have the perfect right to not worry. Going back to what you were saying about your hipster friends that are wanting to be on the cutting edge of everything because they don't want to be seen as being old.
Or missing out. I'm going to be
That's
hip
right.
until I'm 70 years old.
But if you're once you decided I think everything starts with one question, and the question is, am I a music fan or not? And the moment you decide you're a music fan, then you as an individual get to decide at what pace do you discover new music. So for example, when I was a little kid, I remember buying a Kiss record, Rock and Roll Over, and up until then I had just cassettes of them, but when I bought this record, I played that Rock and Roll Over record over and over and over again. And then I went and bought Love Gun, and I played that over and over and over. I think maybe for 6 months, I only listened to those two records. And you know what? I had a right to, you see. So once I decide that I'm a music fan, I get to decide how quickly I move on to the next record or how quickly I move on to the new record. And I'm also a time traveler. So if I decide to go back to the late 50s and start investigating obscure rockabilly music from United States, if that's what I want to do, I will. And if I decide to listen to nothing but 50s rockabilly music and hillbilly music from that period from the United States, and that's all I want to listen to for the next 2 years, that's what I'll do, because I'm a music fan, and that gives me the right to do anything I want.
Yep.
And if I'm a music fan to the point where I want to form my own band, and I play music that moves me, and some of it's punk, so it does sound a bit punky, then I don't have to. You can't force me to join a club that says punk rock either. You know what I mean? Maybe I don't want to join that club. And in any case, if I'm in your clubhouse drinking, someone says, get out. You're actually not part of the club. I go, oh, I'm sorry. You're not punk. Well, I didn't say I was. Well, get out of the punk club. Well, okay. And then the moment you get out of the clubhouse, the world looks better anyway, So,
yep.
I can do anything I want, But there was a stage at one stage in my life when this constant judgment drove me mad. I'm thinking, this is ridiculous, But what it did give me was plenty of ammunition in my music and my art, to come up with really funny things. For me, Brian, I mean, I'm not a very good drawer, Brian, but I don't agree
with that. You have your own style. I can recognize your style. I recognized your style 30 years ago. Having your own style, that's it.
What I meant was, technically speaking, I value you. So, for example, if I can draw something fantastically lifelike, but doesn't really say much, but I can draw something with only a handful of really crude lines, but it's funny as hell and it's going to make me laugh when I finish drawing, I'd rather go for the latter, if you know what I mean. Most of my favorite drawings that I've done have used only a handful of lines, but they're very funny. So, I mean, when I make fun of hipsters, for example, in my art, part of me says that they're they're an easy target,
Yes.
but they're also they're an easy target, but well, they ask for it, you know. So
Totally.
they're begging ridicule through art.
Sure.
So you want to be involved in art, you want to wear a beret to an art gallery and tell people that you speak French, that somebody's going to come after you with humor, mocking your pretentiousness.
Sure.
That's all.
Sure. And also the reaction whenever when people react to some of that stuff, like the hipster, you know, like you said, it's easy to make fun of hipsters. Yeah, it is. It's easy. But when you get a negative reaction from anybody over that, then they've already identified themselves as being the target of what you were drawing, you know?
You know what, Brian? The reason I was mocking hipsters in the first place was because there was a guy that considered himself, he was like a friend of a friend. He played in a whole bunch of local bands that none of whom were of any interest to me, but you know,
Right.
people liked them. So, but this guy was one of these guys as a contemporary man of substance and style. He would be, you know, on the cutting edge of things like environmental awareness, women's issues, gay rights, and all that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
And also, he was very anti-racism and that kind of stuff, right? So, and he also listened to all the right bands, Electric Wizard, you know, blah blah blah, doom metal,
Yeah.
all the heavy, cool stuff that guys like that listen to. But then he went on, you know, on social media, waxing lyrical about Burzum. You know Burzum?
I mean, I know who that guy is, but I haven't paid any fucking attention to any of that shit. But I know what that. Yeah, I know that.
Yeah, he's a convicted murderer who also is a right-wing nationalist. And so I kind of quizzed him. I said, so I saw a post that you wrote about this band, they're a bunch of Nazis, this band, they're, you know, that group of people, they're a bunch of racist assholes, that kind of stuff, but you have no problems, you know, going on about Burzum. So I said, you know, I guess I said, I found that a little bit weird. And then he got real indignant, you know.
Oh, because he called him on it.
I didn't really call him out. I just kind of prodded the bear in the cave a little bit because I thought that was funny. That's all. And then I thought, you know, it's good to have really strong, you know, fist in the air declarations of where you stand on ethics, but then when it comes to telling people that you're on the cutting edge of dangerous music, you know, your sense of ethics can go out the window for a day while you tell people that you're like a nationalist. And then, you know, you know, these guys, there was a bit of calling out of that person's a racist, that person's a wife beater, that person's this, that person's that. But then, you know, you still listen to give money to Burzum. So yeah, that was I just thought, I wonder what he thinks of that. And I thought, I need to do a t-shirt on hipsters because they're pretty funny people, I thought, you know.
Sure. Yeah. Well, the one thing I liked about the interview you did with Damian is you guys ended up talking about the whole idea of I don't want to say cancel culture, but that dilemma of enjoying somebody's art and then finding out that they're maybe not necessarily the nicest person or have done something, and that it's kind of a slippery slope of what to do with that kind of information. You know, like, does it do I really have to know that somebody whose art I like isn't necessarily a nice person? Do I have to really police somebody's life to enjoy something? Like, what is the the cutoff point?
Yeah.
Because
Well,
it is a slippery slope, and that's like, that's definitely a huge concern of a lot of people. I don't know. I thought that was kind of interesting because I kind of agree with your sentiment, your sentiment, which is like, well, maybe they did something pretty terrible in their personal life, but they did something I enjoyed. They did put some good into this world. Like, I don't know, what would be a good example of that for me? When I was a kid, I really liked Bill Cosby's comedy records.
yeah.
I
Okay.
thought he was a master storyteller, and he was really funny without having to be dirty or controversial or whatever. So yeah, it was totally disappointing to find out what a rotten human being he was.
Yeah, I think everyone has to make up their own individual mind. That's what they got to do.
Right.
They got to do what's comfortable for them. So that's why I was a bit perplexed with my friend of a friend that had a habit of raising the red flag every time he saw a band that was meant to be racist or whatever, but he had no problems with a band that was considered cool at the time, which is Burzum. He found that he found the cool of Burzum irresistible because it was dangerous music or whatever, and cool people like dangerous music, but he had no qualms in calling out other bands that supposedly were racist or had right-wing tendencies. Like, he was calling out bands like Rose Tattoo and things like that. So I just went, well, so I found that to have fluid ethics, and that's, to me, that encapsulated the hipster. He doesn't have something that the hipster doesn't really have a strong, solid belief system. They're more worried about being how other people see them, and that's to be mocked. But in regard to things like Michael Jackson and stuff like that, I think that it's such there are so many complex layers, and each individual recording from individual person who has done something terrible, you have to look at it and make up your own mind. For example, what about murderers? What's worse, rape or murder? I don't know. So where do you live? You live in North Carolina?
Yes.
If you murder someone, do you go to jail for longer than rape?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know what the laws are like here. So I couldn't.
I don't know either. What's worse? I don't know what's worse. But
they're both not good.
but if you have a record of somebody who ended up being a murderer, can you keep that? Because a lot of people that I know would happily keep the record of a murderer, but the record of a rapist, he would throw that in the bin. What about, I don't know, what about a bank robber? Is robbing a bank of $1 million worse than, I don't know, robbing $50 from your own friend, your best friend?
Yeah.
A lot of people would think that if you steal from your own best friend $50, that's worse than going into a big corporation or a bank and stealing $50 million. So the level of crime, we all have different views on the severity of it. So it just seems like, for example, Michael Jackson, pedophilia is one of the worst things you could be accused of if you're a recording artist, because that's your back catalog really stains. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So I don't know. I'll have to think about it over and over and over again. But for me, that song, Billie Jean, when I listen to it, it makes me feel good. It doesn't make me feel bad. It makes me feel good. But when somebody else plays that song, it's going to make them feel bad because of the association with pedophilia. In that case, I would say, don't play it. Don't play it, but don't judge me if I happen to like that song still. That's all I would say. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That's it. It's based on, you got to take every situation in an individual sort of way, and every situation's different because every person's different. Every situation is different, so you can't really just paint everybody with the same brushstroke, if that makes sense.
It's hard to say. I mean, but where you draw the line is really up to you, because I know some people who would go through people's record collection and go, you can't listen to that, you can't listen to that, you can't listen to that. It's like, why? Because that guy's right wing in that band, that guy's a right wing asshole, that guy's a right wing asshole. Okay, so, well, there goes my record collection.
Right.
So that's just how some people are, and those people will make judgments on other people. So it's really hard. It's super hard because social media being what it is, social media is being used to judge each other. We all judge each other,
Totally.
So
Totally.
I got absolutely no answers. But all I know is that I bought Thriller by Michael Jackson secondhand. I paid $1 for it. So the money never went to Michael Jackson in the first place. So at some point, that guy must have, to me, that's, I think I said this to Damian, that every human being has a power to contribute negatively to the human race or positively, and they do it at different rates. They do it at different times. And at the time he was making Thriller, he was actually contributing positively to the human race.
Yes.
That's all I can say.
Yeah.
But I mean, but if he were alive today and he was proven to be a pedophile, then for sure he should be in jail, for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But it's you deal with horrible things through the channels that are there. Jail, fines, whatever,
Sure. Social media definitely has driven this narrative of everybody having to be perfect. And I noticed that people are a lot less forgiving about people.
There is no forgiveness.
I don't mean in extreme cases like what Michael Jackson was accused of. I just mean it happens constantly where I'll draw somebody. Here's Roy Wood from The Move. I love Roy Wood. And then I think he's a musical genius. I love all the stuff he's done. I love Wizard. I love the first ELO record. I love The Move. He's great. As a musical artist, I don't know Roy Wood. I just know I really like Roy. And then I'll post something, and then and this happens a lot. Somebody, it's a pity he joined Brexit, or you realize that he joined. It's like, and it's kind of like, okay, so now I can't like this person's art because of their political affiliate. It's like, and I have my opinions about that kind of stuff, but I hate that stuff, because it's kind of like the yeah but sort of comment. Yeah, but he's it's this whole thing of like people categorizing themselves into teens, and if you're this kind of person, then you're my enemy, and if you're that kind of person, then I'm this kind of person, and that stuff drives me nuts. Where it's like,
well, That's exactly right, Brian, because once you start judging every single artist, every single person who likes that artist for every little indiscretion that you can detect, then what you should be doing is turning around like that and looking at your own family. Then you can say, well, my mother's a bit of a homophobe. I should tell everyone my mother's a homophobe. Then you look at your uncle, or my uncle, he's very violent, you know? And then you look over there and it's like, my auntie in London, she joined Brexit too. Attack your own family as well. Nobody's perfect. We're not talking about if there is a beef with somebody some point in our lives with people. I'm not talking about extreme cases like you were saying. Well, I'm not talking about pedophilia, rape, murder, or anything like that, but things like political beliefs and things like that. To constantly be fixated on it, is that good for civilization? That fixation of because all that's gonna do is, I mean, all that's gonna do is make everyone just feel bad about everything. Whereas if you listen to anyone who's heard Blackberry Way by The Move, all that does is make you feel really, really good. And in fact, if no Roy Wood, if there was no Roy Wood and there was no Trevor Burton, if there was no Bev Bevan, there would not be any Cheap Trick. And if there was no Cheap Trick, there would be no Surrender, no Dream Police, right? Now, what kind of world would that be, right? So Roy Wood supported Brexit. I mean,
it's like, what do you want me? It's like one of those but comments. Well, you know this, or it just drives me nuts because it's like, I guess as an individual person, you sort of judge what you can allow in your life, but a lot of that stuff just seems like witch hunt, finger pointing horseshit to me. You know, it's like,
I think so too.
And I think somebody that would join that sort of situation is still a lot different than, you know, a convicted child molester or a serial rapist or you know, because I feel like I live under the whole like live and let live, unless you're hurting somebody, unless you're actually hurting somebody, and you have to make up your own mind, draw the line with those kind of things. But it's like, you know, if you allow me the freedom to be who I am and I'm not hurting anybody, I'll allow you to do the same in return if you're not actually hurting anybody. You know, it's like live and let live, unless you cross that line. And then that's a whole different story. Like, you know, raping, killing, plundering, whatever it might be. But just because somebody might think differently than me doesn't change the fact that I really enjoy what they've done and they give me a lot of pleasure. So I don't really give a fuck about any of that. I'm too old to live under the whole idea of this is my team and this is your team. And, you know, even with politics, you know, it's like, just, I know some really nice people that don't agree with me on a lot of things and vice versa. And, you know, you judge people by their actions and not by what they say. That's always a good rule of thumb. You know, listen, look at what I do. Don't listen to what I say. You know, like how do people conduct themselves? You know.
Well, Brian, you know, but we are talking about social media, where the human race doesn't have any idea what proper conduct is on social media, because it took us 60,000 years to work out how to talk to each other, right? So that guy who was saying, what about Brexit in regard to Roy Wood? Now, if it was just on the internet, there might be 300 people looking at your post about Roy Wood right then. But
Yeah.
then, but in reality, away from the computer, you might meet that one guy walking down the street. Oh, hello, Brian. And he says hello to you. And you
Right.
said to me, what's on my mind? I'm thinking about Roy Wood. I love everything he ever did, including Wizard. And in fact, he wrote some of the greatest proto-glam pop songs of all time. And he was in the first lineup of ELO. What do you think about that? And at that point, if he actually said something about Brexit, and then you'd be very, very surprised if he said anything about Brexit. You'd probably go, what about that song? What about that song, Brontosaurus? What about that stomping, incredible rocker, Brontosaurus? What do you think of that? Then you'd be talking. I doubt he'd be talking about Brexit. He just did that Brexit thing because he was on Facebook or whatever. And in Facebook, everyone's saying, well, we've got guns here. We're going to hand all these guns out. Use the guns to shoot animals and then eat them to sustain your life. And what do people do? They shoot each other, don't they? So Facebook is just about people shooting each other because I've got a gun. It's like, well, I'm sick of hunting rabbits. Now I'm going to shoot a real human being. We hunt each other, because nobody has actually said, don't point the gun at me. Of course they're going to point the gun at you, Brian. That's what Facebook is. You're giving everyone guns and telling them not to shoot. Of course they're going to shoot you.
Well, yeah. Well, it's also different when you actually know, and I've been in this situation, everybody's been in this situation, when somebody doesn't like you, but you've actually, why they don't like you and you've contributed to that. That happened to me actually kind of recently with in regards to somebody. When you actually did something and you realize you had a part in that judgment of you, then you got to just take it. But when it's some idiot on the internet that you don't know and you're just offering up, I can't complain about any of that stuff if I'm putting myself out there, but I'm just commenting more on the comment of just, it's just that quick idiot response of like, yeah, well, that person did this. And it's like, I don't give a fuck, it's like, I don't, that's different. That's totally different. Somebody that doesn't actually know you, that doesn't like something or is offering the yeah, but comment. That's a lot different than actually a personal disappointment.
Yeah.
I guess.
So. You can't say anything on Facebook without, you could just, for example, just hypothetically, you might say the greatest guitar solo of all time is Elliot Easton on Touch and Go, maybe on the Panorama album. How about that guitar solo?
That's a fucking great guitar solo.
Now, imagine somebody says, yes, but Elliot Easton is a Trump supporter, But what you got to say is, well, and I'm not saying Elliot Easton is, I don't know. This is just all hypothetical.
I know what you're saying.
But what I'm saying is you can't cherry pick something from civilization and put a light on it and admire it for 1 second without somebody saying, stop. Because that comes from a dark place, you can't any sort of enjoyment you have in life. And part of this I blame on the internet and social media, because everyone's talking on top of each other. Everyone's on top of each other talking. So, my voice is important. So listen to me. Elliot Easton is a Trump supporter. So
you can't enjoy that guitar solo anymore. And he's like,
yeah. And my answer to that would be, can't I just go in the room and shut the door and listen to that solo for myself? And at one stage, I just wanted my friends to know that I really like that solo without somebody jumping on it.
Right. I'm excited. I like music. Well, it's like I'm sharing this thing. A lot of the internet stuff, Facebook, it's like, here's what I do. Here's some artwork, I like this song. Maybe you'll like it. You guys should, just the excitement of enjoying something and wanting to share it with people. That's all it is, And so it's kind of like, so when those comments happen, it's like, man, yeah, I sure as fuck did not like Donald Trump whatsoever. In fact, I would really say that Donald Trump was just a reflection of the internet and social media. That's a social media driven cult idiot that, I mean, the farther away we get from that, the more I just can't believe he was ever elected president in the first place. And this is a big fucking country I live in. And, it was pretty fucking close. I was actually surprised he lost, I thought, okay, now I'm going off in another subject, but so, yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, I did not like that person, and I did not like any of that stuff, and I couldn't believe it, and I made my judgments, especially with the pandemic. That's when it's like, well, this guy just does not give a shit about anybody. And
Yeah.
the thing that's really funny is, I'm just going to go all in here because I don't usually talk about that stuff. But it's like, I mean, I can't believe he was actually really president, and yet I can. But he's just a cult leader. I spent like a couple of weeks reading about cults, and some of the more famous ones. Jim Jones is a really horrible guy in Canada, a brutal, horrible person. And there's this mentality that Scientology. There's a mentality that people must have to be susceptible to cults. And I think the obvious extension of that, which was totally driven by social media and the internet culture, was Donald Trump. And it was just amazing. And just looking back on it now, the farther away we get, especially with the whole COVID pandemic thing and the way people in this country reacted. Well, I'm sure it's the same anywhere. There's smart people and then there's dumb people. There's way more dumb people than I ever would have guessed in the aftermath of Trump and all that stuff. Like, it was amazing. It's totally amazing. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry
No, not at all.
Sorry for derailing it, but it's like I just saw how little people like, I don't like, there's a lot of people I don't like, of course, but I live in a free society and I'm expected to do my part, which is like, I'm going to get fucking shots. I have a kid. I don't want her to get sick. I'm doing my civic duty. And it's like, I just felt like it was really obvious what had to be done. And again, it's just the whole categorizing thing and just, I'm on this team and, my freedoms. And it's like, you just want freedom from responsibility,
Yeah.
That's all. You just give a shit about yourself first and foremost. You don't care about the big picture. So that was really disheartening,
When the vaccine was developed, I was like, can I be the first one in the queue? Shoot it through my eyeball if you want to. Just give me the fucking thing. Give it to me as much as you can. I need that stuff, But that was just me, I couldn't wait to get the fucking vaccine, but that was just me. But I also have a friend who's an epidemiologist, and so I listen to him as well. People go, do your own research, that cat's cry, do your own research and that kind of stuff. I said, well, I did. I didn't do my own research because I'm not a scientist, but I did the next best thing, which is go to my friend who is a scientist. And I said, tell me everything I need to know about the vaccine and the coronavirus. He said, you don't need to know anything. All you need to know is you need to take the vaccine. And I said, why would you say that? He goes, because I'm a researcher. I'm a scientist. I checked it out. I checked it out for you. So you don't have to do it. I said, okay, I'll go and get the vaccine. Yeah. So I did do the research. Well, someone did the research for me. So that's good.
You're just a sheep.
Well, that makes me a sheep. Oh, well,
That's the response. You're just sheep. Like, I don't know. When I was a kid, I remember getting vaccine shots and shots. I don't, nobody batted a fucking eye about the polio vaccine or whatever. It's just like, it's just, there's this mistrust of everybody and everything that
Yeah,
goes along with people just demanding to be categorized over everything. Does that
yeah,
make
it's
sense?
pretty nuts. Yeah, it's pretty nuts. But when the AIDS epidemic happened back in the 80s, that was controlled for everyone listening to what the scientists were saying. And the scientists were saying the AIDS virus is spread through sexual transmission and through blood,
Mhm.
sexual intercourse. So if you are going to have sex, use protection. And if you're going to get blood transfusion, let's check this out. Make sure that the blood's pure,
Yeah.
and then the virus will eventually be suppressed, So condoms and things like that, they checked it out. It's not being AIDS virus isn't spread through breathing. It's not spread through those methods. It's spread through sexual contact and blood transfusions. So that's where you go. We listen to the scientists and we
Well,
suppress AIDS.
that makes sense to me. Boy,
Yeah,
I'm really glad the internet wasn't around when that was going on. Or
yeah. Jeez. I mean, it's for me the vaccine is similar to if I'm riding my motorcycle in traffic, I'll probably put my
wear a helmet.
helmet on. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, these are very interesting times that we're living in. That's for sure.
yeah,
Well, let me ask you a few more questions and I'll let you go. I really
sure.
appreciate this. Has been great. So thanks a lot for agreeing to talk to me and everything.
No problems.
Yeah, but you're also
I'm a
like,
big fan of your artwork.
oh, thank you, thanks. Well, I've always liked your art and music and stuff over the years too. So, and thanks for letting me and Charles from Bifocal Media do that shirt. I know that you also did a couple shirts with Charles and stuff too. But thank you. I definitely appreciate it. You're also my ambassador to Australia because I've never been to Australia,
You
unfortunately.
would love it here. You would love it
Yeah,
here.
yeah, I think I would, but my knowledge of Australia and Australian music over the years is there's definitely huge gaps in my actual overall knowledge, but I am impressed. I've heard you talk about seeing bands like the Birthday Party and the Scientists, and those were like two of my favorites among two of my favorite Australian bands. I love both of those bands. I think they're and like Radio Birdman and the Saints and stuff. And so you were able to see, and also X, because you brought up X before, and I was a late comer to that Aspirations record and stuff, and it's like this stuff is really great. I never. Is there like any actual? Well, actually, I don't. Instead of going down that route, you saw the Scientists and the Birthday Party a lot growing up when you were younger. Or
Well, with the scientists, we saw them. The first time we saw them was 1982.
okay,
Probably towards the end there, and then for the next year, we saw them as much as we could. But I remember the first time I saw them, it was more than my brain could handle.
right,
Because they had a different incarnation of the scientists.
sure. There was that original one when they were in Perth during the first version with that song Last Night and all that stuff, Pissed on the
That's
Road,
right.
and which
Power
is more
pop.
kind of like Johnny Thundersy in a
That's
way.
right. Yes,
With
with different lineup.
right,
And I talked to Kim, the lead singer from the Scientists. I said the two incarnations of the Scientists are very different sound wise and image wise,
sure,
but it's got the same name.
sure.
Why? Why didn't you pick another name? And he said, I just couldn't be bothered trying to come up with another name. So I just kept the name Scientist. I said, so there's no Ian Sharples, there's no Ben Juniper, there's no James Baker. It's just Kim Salmon. So you replace those three guys, you replace Ian, Ben, and James with Boris Shujovic, Brett Rickson, and Tony Tulis. So you replace your entire band except yourself with three different guys. So the sound was going to change anyway, but you kept the name because you couldn't be bothered thinking of something else. And he said, yes, that's right. And I thought, well, I would have just picked another name. But then the Scientist, it's such a brilliant name. And it became synonymous for me. It became synonymous with a band that I saw at a place called the Mossman Hotel. We walked in and we saw the support band, Box of Fish. They were brilliant. They were a gothic band. They sounded like a little bit like almost a pre-industrial sounding. I don't know. They sounded all tribal with a lot of tom drums and everything. But then Scientists, the main band, came on. I didn't see any of their faces. Their fringes were over their eyes. So they had this ridiculous hair. They're all wearing really obnoxious, loud, vintage paisley t-shirts, paisley button shirts rather, tight jeans, every single one, black leather pointy boots, every single one of them. I didn't see their faces the whole night because their fringes were over their face. But I remember they were doing covers by Captain Beefheart, by Alan Vega. They did Clear Spot. Yes, that's right. They were playing this swampy, sparse brand of pretty scary music. I'd never seen anything like it. It was like blues rock from hell. I'd never seen anything like it. And to this day, if I close my eyes, I can see them on stage. It was hard to describe. All I know is that they were wearing polyester shirts. So when I went up to the front, I got static electricity shocks from the stage. They're all wearing polyester stuck to their chests. And I went and saw them a week later. I saw them somewhere else, and they started the set with an Alan Vega cover. And I went up to Kim and I said, hey, what's that first song you started off with? And he said that was an Alan Vega song off the album Collision Drive. Can't remember the name of the song. But anyway, I went and bought the Alan Vega record. Alan Vega from Suicide had a solo record based on the Scientists playing that song. And I saw them again and again. And each time they got better. And then at the end of towards the end of 1983, I think it was around October or something, they announced that they were going to do a show with the Birthday Party. So there were the three bands that we wanted to see on that bill was Birthday Party, the Scientists, and X. So
that's a good show.
Yeah, it was more than, and at the time I was 17 or 8. I was 18. So God. I was still a teenager. So my brain melted. Basically what we did, because we're all at school, we went to the University of New South Wales where the concert was being held. We went there early and we watched all the bands arrive with their guitars. And then we were waiting outside. And then finally the doors opened. We waited outside for a couple of hours because we were just kids, We all stormed in. A couple of us had to have fake phony IDs to get in because it was a drinking establishment. I was already 18, I'm pretty sure. And then we went straight to the front lip of the stage and we stayed there the whole night. We stayed there the whole fucking night.
I bet.
And yeah, and it was...
Sounds amazing.
Nick Cave pulled my hair and years later, I told him that. I met Nick Cave years and years later. I said, "You pull my hair at the Roundhouse." He said, "Sorry." I said, "No problems. I forgive you." But they were incredible. Yeah, you had when the birthday party played, you had Nick Cave, who looked like he looked like a scarecrow. Then you had on stage right, you had uh, um, Roland S. Howard, who looked like like a living embodiment of Edmund Munch's The Scream, and then on guitar, and then on the left you had Tracy Pugh on bass with a cowboy hat, and then
one of the greatest bass players on the planet.
Yeah, well, he had a Fender Jazz bass and with those single coil pickups, which gave that mid-range, that
that
angry
growl.
sound. Yeah, the growl. Yeah, so that's how he did it.
Was Mick Harvey still?
He was playing drums. He was playing drums.
Here's my little dark secret about the birthday party. I prefer them when they had Phil Calvert playing drums as a live, but I never saw them because I thought, I love all the material, but I loved it when they had two guitar players. But of course, I never saw.
I never saw them with Phil, but Mick was playing drums, but the stuff he was playing was very, very tribal. I remember him hitting the floor tom over and over again. I remember seeing him, and he was. But with Tracy, he'd hit his bass and he'd bend his neck backwards, and I thought for sure that hat would fall off, but it never fell off. Yeah. But I mean, all three bands were incredible. X, Scientist, and Birthday Party. I mean, we went home, and on Monday, I was talking to my classmates about the concert that we went to, and after 5 minutes of talking about it, I just gave up. I just couldn't explain to them what I'd witnessed because they were, and at the time, I really thought that that gig was going to go down in history. I really believed it at the time. At the age of 18, I really thought that this gig is going to be remembered for the rest of our lives, And to this day, I still know lots of friends. A lot of my friends that I met after the concert, who are a bit older than me, they were all there, and we talk about it even to this day. That was just an incredible show. But I'm glad I got to see them.
I'm jealous. That sounds awesome.
Well, Nick pulled my hair. He pulled my hair, and he let go, and then he was falling behind, and he put his hand out, and his hand landed on the drum riser, and he pushed himself back up, and he came back to the front of the stage. The whole time he had his microphone like that, and he was going like this. His hair was everywhere. It was, we were talking about the whole concept of cool before. Yes. I think it's right that people like myself never try and work out what cool is, or try and get to what cool is, or try and attain cool. It's right that I don't ever attempt these things, but I'll tell you one thing. I actually fully believe some people are actually cool. And I would have to say Nick Cave is definitely cool.
I agree.
There's no getting around it. He's got something.
Yeah.
Besides talent.
Well, yeah. Well, I'm on his side forever as far as him as an artist. So even if I don't necessarily like every little thing he does, I totally respect the fact that he, and I do, I do like a lot of his, like the record he did with Warren Ellis that came out last year is as good as a lot of his other stuff. He just has something, for sure. Did you like the Scientist album they just did last year? Because I thought that was like a fucking great record, like really good. We listened to that. Me and my wife listened to that record.
I still haven't heard it because I've got it in my house. I still haven't heard it. It's just in a big pile of records that I have to listen to.
Yeah,
But
it's really,
everyone tells me it's really good.
it's really good. It's like there's a song on it called Magic Pants that is fucking, oh, so good. The whole record's really good. It's like a way more. It's I don't want to say it's a return to form record, but it says to me it's as good as anything they've ever done. To me,
They are a great band. They, you know,
is that
they
guy
were pretty.
considered? Is Kim Salmon considered as influential and famous as like somebody like Nick Cave? I mean, because
Oh no way. Nick Cave in Australia
a god.
yeah, that's right. And Kim is not a god. He's an angel. You know, he's an archangel or something. But
It's like
Kim's
why isn't this guy considered? I, I, I have an outsider perspective, obviously looking at it because I've never been to Australia. I'm not Australian, but it's like everything this guy has done is as good in its own way as somebody like Nick Cave or whatever. But I guess obviously it's Nick Cave is probably a little more successful financially.
I think so. But you know, those
Rather
shows
than
that I saw, yeah, those shows I saw with the scientists, you know, they were some of the best shows I'd ever seen in my life. And when they came back to Australia, they went to London to live,
yeah,
and then they came back in 1988. They did two shows in Sydney, and we played with them both shows
right,
in '88, and so we watched them, and they were just as good as they were before they left. But both nights when we played with them, they didn't do any encore, and
right.
I didn't talk to the scientist guys that night, but I got told later that they didn't. They had this habit now of not doing any encores. They just play their set and go home, you know. But they were the coolest. I remember watching them, thinking, God, my brain's melting listening to this stuff. They were just as good, you know. And
Yeah.
um, I guess the first guy out of the scientists that I became friends with was Kim, but I guess about 10 years ago, I got to know Boris, the bass player,
Mhm.
and I told him, hey Boris, I saw you play that many times. I never saw your face. It took me 20 years to see what you look like, you know, because his hair was always over his face, you
Yeah.
know.
Did
Great
you
band.
did you were you a fan of any of Roland S. Howard's like his two records he managed to put out, or These Immortal Souls? Or did you follow any of the stuff before his untimely passing, or saw him or anything?
Yeah, well, we played with I think he was in the Crime and the City Solution, wasn't he?
Yeah, he
Was he in
was.
that band? Yeah, we played with them all those years ago.
Okay.
So yeah, but I do like some of his stuff. I mean, I've got his records here, but they're not something that I would listen to every day. But when I do listen to them, I think they're fantastic records.
Sure.
But I think even with Nick Cave solo stuff, um, I still come back to Birthday Party as the band that does it for me. You know, they
Um,
had something. That combination had something. You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
Nick and
Uh,
Roland, they had something there.
oh
His
yeah. I
his
mean,
his his spooky guitar sound did something with Nick's voice and Tracy's bass playing. Those three guys, they did something to each other in that band, you know, and that wasn't replicated after that. But it's still incredible. But the Birthday Party had something there,
I
some combination.
yeah, I totally agree. There's a lot of Nick Cave and the Bad Seed records that I do really like. But when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, it's still I'm not stuck in the past. I like the Nick Cave a lot of those records very much, but as far as I totally agree, the combination of all those guys, like Junkyard, Prayers on Fire, that live album that came out not too long ago, I love that one.
Oh yeah, that's fantastic.
That's
Yeah,
really
yeah,
that's the one that I think Henry Rollins had something to do with.
right.
Live 182. It's like that's what I still listen to that stuff. Yeah, we never it's weird what got through in the States, like actually it's kind of funny. I didn't really, even though I had a few pen pals back in the punk rock hardcore 80s, there wasn't really a lot of bands other than the Hard Ons and maybe those few guys I was writing that I knew about, like I think there was another band called Mass Appeal that
They were our friends. Yeah.
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 I think God, there's one main guy in the band that
Brett.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. But yeah, most of the stuff I knew about that was after that. So it was like, all the stuff that I've been asking you questions about was what I think I saw the Hoodoo Gurus once. No, it was the Lime Spiders. The Lime Spiders played in Raleigh right after I moved here. But like it's kind of funny what got filtered back to the States or what was considered popular Australian music, because we were stuck with like Men at Work was like huge in America. And like, I mean, I don't know, I'm not trying to be mean to anyone that likes Men at Work, but it's like, it's weird that Men at Work was the thing that got imported or got a worldwide deal, and people love that stuff. It was, it's not terrible, but it's like, In Excess.
Yes.
But I did like early In Excess. I thought it was good new wave music, but again, I don't know what the situation of that stuff. And then the first The Vinyls record, I really liked.
Oh, that's a really good record.
That's a fucking great record. And then after that record, like she was really good. And that record and those songs, that's like a really good, tough, hard rocking new wave record with really good singing and really good songs. And then I don't know what happened, but they never had anything that was good after that, more or less. They had a few good songs. But
that was their peak, the first album.
Yeah, that first record's incredible. It's great. And that they had some big song here in the States, like when they got cleaned up and that I never liked that. I mean, whatever. And it's like, anyway, that was the stuff that I managed to, bigger stuff that came from Australia that I managed to hear that for whatever reason in the early 80s. And then like years later, the Angels, kind of like a European sounding AC/DC kind of with a
that fantastic band, Angels, fantastic.
And but they had to change their name when they came here because of the American band Angel, who I actually was a big fan of.
Hey, On Earth as It Is in Heaven is my favorite record, and I also like parts of White Hot as well.
White Hot. Yeah. I like that stuff. I still like that stuff.
Yeah, that White Hot probably had their best song, "Don't Leave Me Lonely," and also there was a cover of the Young Rascals, I think, on that.
I Ain't Gonna Get Out My Heart Anymore.
Yeah, great cover, great version on that record. Great.
Well, there was no room in the States for two Angels apparently, so
yeah.
And then there was somebody else that and then years later, I guess through the AC/DC connection, was actually discovering the Easy Beats and going, well, this stuff is as good as any of that other 60s stuff that was going on all over the world,
Yeah, fantastic band.
Yeah, it's really good. And that's generally it. There's sort of huge gaps in my knowledge of a lot of Australian music, but AC/DC and Scientist, Birthday Party, there's this, I don't know. I think he said something in your interview with Damian that there was always this hard rock sort of thing in Australia in the mid 70s that seemed to be this thing that everybody had.
That's right. It was Australia was obsessed back in the mid 70s with blues based hard rock. That's why AC/DC just went big really quickly. They became really popular really quickly, AC/DC. But they worked really hard. They were playing all the time. But if you can imagine a band like AC/DC, but a million of bands like that, but not as good, playing all over Sydney, all over Melbourne, So
Sure.
that kind of guitar-driven blues-based hard rock was massively popular in Australia, massively popular.
Right.
And you hear it all the time, you walk past a pub at night and you could hear it blasting out of the pub. You stand outside as a kid and you hear all this music coming out. You get a free concert. They'd have free concerts on Sunday afternoons at the park and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was I remember my childhood being filled with hard rock in Australia. But my friends who were older at the time, who were like 15 and 16, would go to these suburban dances, and bands like Finch would play, Ted Mulry Gang would play, AC/DC would play, the Coloured Balls would play, Rose Tattoo would play, Hush would play, all these hard rockin' bands,
Right.
sometimes, tinged with glam rock as well. They would be playing all over the place.
Do you think that when bands like the Saints and the Radio Birdman came about, would you say that they were like sort of a reaction to the blues-based rock and roll? Did they consider, was there any affiliation with that, or was that like when the Saints and Radio Birdman came out? Do you think that was kind of like a reaction to Buster Brown or Colored Balls or whatever? Because those bands, even like the Saints, it's documented that they were considered a punk rock band too, but they put out some of the first quote unquote punk rock releases before the Sex Pistols. I think that's right. Do you think that was sort of a reaction against that kind of stuff?
Well, I did talk to Rob, the singer from Radio Birdman, about this at one stage, and he did say that he felt like he had absolutely no affiliation with any of the other bands that were around that were hard rock. So, for example, not long ago, John Needham, their manager, was telling me that they played with Rose Tattoo and they kind of didn't get along with them, especially the road crew and stuff like that. So they consider themselves outside the mainstream hard rock scene. And I'm pretty sure the Saints would have. I didn't know. I only know Ed, and I've never talked to him about that. I've never met any of the other guys, and I certainly didn't haven't talked to them directly about this at all. But I'm pretty sure they would have felt outside of the mainstream hard rock scene as well. I would say so. I think they would have definitely been outsiders for sure. And that's how everyone else sees them, as something brand new apart from AC/DC and bands like that, for sure.
Sure. Which brings me to the Hard Ons, because I remember buying Dick Cheese and songs like Ache to Touch You and stuff. And you guys, I think it was in retrospect that I realized you guys are really in there with all those other bands, but you seem to have your own thing that's kind of separate from every other band that we've talked about. But you've had this long off and on, I don't want to say career, but I guess that's what it is. You know, like you guys definitely have like, I don't know. I think of you guys as sort of, you're up there with all the other bands we talked about, but it seems like you have this sort of self-contained thing. Does that make sense?
I think we always were, because it happened naturally, because uh when we first started playing, we were younger than everyone else.
Yeah.
So um we we have we had so many diverse influences from well, our first love was obviously bands like AC/DC and Led Zeppelin, things like that. But when we discovered punk rock, we got obsessed with it.
Good.
So none of us were really punk people, as it were. You know, we're just kids. I mean, you know, we didn't know too many people in the punk scene other than a handful of people. We were too young to actually know them. So we were suburban kids, for better or worse.
Yeah.
So because we were young, we took influence from 60s garage music, which was very popular in Sydney at the time.
Yeah.
So bands like Lime Spiders, for example, those guys were from that background, the 60s garage background. Um, so I think because of our diversity of influence, we ended up becoming our own thing. And you
Yeah.
know, when you're young, you don't have any fear about fitting in anywhere. You just kind of do what comes. You're in a true garage band sense of the word. You just do what you kind of feel like at the time, and because we've got nothing to lose. I mean, you haven't played any gigs, so that's we ended up with our own thing, I think, and it's probably the one of the main benefits of playing in a band like the Hard Ons, that we don't really have any sort of affiliation with any sort of
Anything.
scene. Yeah, which it ended up coming in really handy, not having an affiliation with any scene, because that meant that we could play with anyone. So we got more gigs than anyone else. You know, we played with all sorts of different bands. We just jumped on any bill, so that ended up being really good for us. You know, um, but um, but I remember the punk bands that were around physically looked punk and sounded punk. You know, there were a few bands around at the time that were obviously heavily influenced by the second wave of punk from Britain. You know, the bands that sounded more like The Exploited and things like that.
I was
So there
just
were
gonna
those.
say, I was just gonna say, who is a punk rock looking band from England from the second world? The Exploited, you know.
Yeah. So so
Another
oh, actually they were from Scotland, but we're talking about
job.
the same thing. Yeah. But yeah, so there were a lot of bands in Australia that were a little bit like that kind of stuff. But uh obviously we were way more influenced by things like Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin and things like that, and those guys weren't really. So um, and we really like 60s garage and psychedelic music as well. We liked um, we liked bands like Public Image Limited, Birthday Party, the post punk stuff is in the Banshee. So we kind of had a diverse um,
Oh yeah,
influence.
you guys liked all kinds of different kinds of music,
Yeah,
which was
and
pretty apparent.
but because we're too young to be involved in any sort of a scene, um, we we kind of developed our own thing. So we didn't get lumped with any sort of um, scene or genre or anything like that. And that came in really handy later. And when we want to go and get more gigs, we could play with lots of different people. But we did get called um, a punk band um, many times because I guess because it was fast and loud at the time. So
Sure. When did you guys go to America?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What was that, Brian?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I cut out. When did the Hard Ons first go to America? I have this.
88, 1988.
Yeah,
Yeah, we toured with a band called Bullet La Volta in Boston.
I remember them.
Yeah, and we ended up playing with Agnostic Front, Scream. We played with the Doughboys. We played with Big Drill Car. Who else did we play with? We played with gee whiz. We played with Slapshot in Boston. Yeah, we played with lots of different bands. The second time we came over was 1989. We played with Jeff Dahl. Uh, who we played with Coffin Break, Poison Idea. We did a big tour with Poison Idea. Played with the Melvins. We played with Mr. T Experience. We played with Hole. Remember that band Hole? We played with them. The Leaving Trains. And we played with, geez, what was that band? I'm trying to think. The Lazy Cowgirls, we played with them. The Adolescents, we played with them. They were fantastic. Had a great time in 1989. Then we came back in 1993, just before we broke up, and then again in 2006.
Wow, man. And I never was able to see you guys for whatever reason. But I read about. I think I read about the first tour in Flipside 40 whatever years ago.
Oh yeah, we always did. We always had enough fans to make it interesting, except for places like Chicago. We played in 1988. We played Chicago, and there was 26 people, and then in 1989 we played Chicago, and there was 27 people. So we improved by one person in 1 year.
Not big in Chicago, apparently. What were your impressions coming over here for the first time? I bet that was kind of exciting.
Yeah, it was amazing because it was like being on a TV set, because the things that we see about the United States is all through TV. So it was amazing being there, and I just could not believe how big your portions of food are in the States. You eat those plates are massive, and we eat, those servings are very generous. And I remember thinking there was more food in the United States than anywhere else I'd ever been. There just seemed to be just food everywhere, and not just lots of food, but all different sorts varieties, And when we're in California, I remember eating lots and lots of Mexican food, and I thought that was the greatest thing I'd ever eaten. I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah,
And
good Mexican food in California,
yeah,
of course.
and the other thing that I remember is how the audiences, for example, at certain punk gigs, really seemed way more involved with punk than, say, in Australia. So, I mean, we're talking about punk scenes. In Australia, it's all different rabble of people that kind of are loosely called punk, and then they go to these shows. But in America, for example, I remember when we played with Slapshot, for example, and when we played with Agnostic Front, how unified people were, that you could see that they were from this big scene, and that was something I'd never seen before to that level, and it's just something that you'd read about in magazines like Maximum Rock and Roll and things like that, but I never witnessed it. But but we didn't have that kind of stuff back in Australia. We just had, I mean, if you had 500 people at your show in Australia, it was just a loose rabble of people rather than all from the one punk scene or whatever. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
like a real mixture, a real melting pot.
Yeah. So I found that really fascinating, and I thought, and then there were people saying, there's the New York hardcore scene, the Boston hardcore scene, there's an LA hardcore scene, and that kind of stuff, and we didn't in Australia, for example, we never had said the Sydney hardcore scene. You know, it just sounded a little bit. It's like, well, it's just people in Sydney watching bands. You know what I mean? We didn't really. Not many people coined the term Sydney hardcore scene. Not until later in the 90s when they actually did. You know.
It's like sports teams or something, like regional pride, and here's our scene and whatever. And that actually could exist before the internet. Now it's like everybody knows everything. Whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So. Yeah, but yeah, I found America like a fascinating place. I found a lot of punks that I met in the punk scene in the States the first time around, quite nationalistic. Um,
Yeah.
really, yeah, and I found that really strange. I met a couple of kids in Boston who said that they were. I met this skinhead kid in Boston. He was like a Chinese American kid, and he had a shaven head, and he was explaining to me the nationalism aspect of his belief system. It was obviously he was a very nationalistic kind of a guy, and he was for most part I didn't understand what the fuck he was talking about because it was just sounded foreign to me. But
Yeah.
yeah, but you know, I mean, yeah, it was all. I mean, it was all. Yeah, it was just bewildering. Let me say, it's coming from somewhere like Australia, where we don't. It's hard to explain. It's hard to explain.
Yeah. No, I understand. I mean, it's that's kind of why I asked you about Australia, because it's, to an outsider, it's who's never been there. It's the idea of going there is fascinating. One day, I am gonna
Yeah,
do it. But yeah, it's the same thing. I would love to go there and go, oh man, just the geography and just, I don't know. It's just a sense of being in a place that's a completely different place, super far away, is, being able to travel is kind of appealing.
you'd love it. You'd love it here.
I'm sure I would. I've heard that before. So let me ask you a few more questions about the Hard Ons and what you guys are doing now, and then we'll wrap it up. So,
Sure.
Obviously, life since the pandemic age has probably slowed things down a little bit, but I I did know that you had released an album with a different lineup and
Yes.
new singer. And without going into detail, and I had no idea about this, I didn't know that the third original member of Hard Ons got in some kind of trouble, which made you and Blackie make the decision to change things. I did not know
That's
that.
exactly right.
I did not know that until literally this morning, because I remember reading about that, and not reading about the circumstances, but going, "Oh, okay, well, yeah, that would be a situation that would require some some sort of change to be made," and then that
Yeah.
led to your new singer, who was a friend of yours from another band from a long time ago. Was there any activity that was supposed to happen after that record came out that was curtailed because of pandemic and stuff like that?
Yeah. So he was touring with his own bands the whole while he was recording with the Hard Ons. In between playing, he was recording with the Hard Ons, making a record. And then
Yeah.
after he'd finished his commitment with his band UMI, we were supposed to do some shows, but they didn't happen because of we went Melbourne and Sydney went back into isolation because of COVID. So we had one show touted for July that never happened. Then we had tentative shows penciled in for November. They never happened. But we are going to play a secret show. We're playing an unannounced show that that well, it's a secret, so we can't tell anybody. But yeah, in a couple of weeks we'll be playing one of those unannounced shows where we just go on stage in a small pub and just play, just so that we actually get the first one out of the way, because we haven't actually played with this lineup yet. But the guy is a really he's a really good friend, and he's a fantastic talented guy. So he's exactly what we needed. We needed new blood, because putting aside everything to do with any sort of trouble that Kesh, original founding member, got into, Kesh had been out of the band for 15 years, right? And we invited him back into the band because we went on tour for a 30th anniversary tour, and he enjoyed himself. And for 15 years, when he was out of the band, he did nothing musically, and I just thought that it was a real waste of his talent. And for the first couple of years, he was good, but then when he started losing enthusiasm for the band, and I have to say, it was obvious that he playing in the Hard Ons wasn't a huge big priority for him in terms of commitment and things like that. So it was getting a little bit frustrating anyway, because I mean, he told us, he said, I just want to play shows. I'm not really interested in doing a new album. He said that to us in a group email. So we had to find a new singer anyway at some stage. So when this thing happened, it was all fast forwarded anyway. We said, okay, just get a new singer in, kind of thing, and you deal with what's happening in your life, and we have to go on with our band, that kind of thing. So the guy that we got was a perfect guy because he understood the band really well. Tim, he was a guy that never stopped buying any of the Hard Ons records. I mean, just even the most obscure little records that we would release, he would have. So when we were writing a set list for possible gigs coming up, he'd say, can we do Darth Vader Pretends, which is a song off a flexi disc that we put out. He said, I've got that song on the flexi disc that you released with the magazine. I go, okay, we'll do that song. And then he'd be picking obscure songs from recent releases, not from the 80s that most people would know about, So he was he understood the whole idea of the band and how we had changed over the years to become, I think, a better band, So he was a perfect guy, and his vocal range is fantastic. He's a good songwriter himself. He's a fantastic songwriter himself. So we really like him, We just like someone who just wants to play. That's all he wants to do. Just wants to go and play and make records.
Yeah. Awesome. Woo!
Had enough?
We've been talking a while. Let me see how long it's been. I think we've been talking and I certainly don't mind, but let's see, 7:30. It's 10 o'clock.
Oh my God.